All right. All right, so we'll get this thing going. All right. Just a couple of ideas. We're learning in Kalach Chokhmah, which uh, is known as the Ramchal's Rabbi great Torah sage of Italy, and he wrote this sefer as like kind of like a Kabbalistic works. Now, we've been reading it for, we're in the first 11 chapters, and he's really going into this concept of prophecy and how prophecy manifests itself. And so he brings, a very controversial idea. I don't know if it's controversial, but it's just different the way I understood it. And I've talked to other people about it, that necessarily didn't also agree with this perspective, which is basically like he brings Rambam and Rambam's, um, speaking about prophecy and speaking about how the prophet sees, which is interesting because this week it says Re'eh Balak saw. Anyway, so he said the prophet first sees, and then it's inscribed in his heart. And so the Ramchal is explaining that when the Rambam is explaining that, he's explaining the actual process of prophecy and how the prophet sees. So he's dealing with the aspect of seeing now, right? Which is this aspect of like, what do we actually see? What do we don't see? What is seen? And then from there, we could kind of get an idea of what God is telling the prophet, right? Like how this process of revelation came to that. So now we could reread the Tanakh and these different things that kind of like. But one of the ideas also that's it's kind of like a thing, and it comes from having a lot of discussions with I spend a good amount of time like having a lot of conversations on social media platforms, and a lot of it is inspired by the desire of just wanting to know what other people are thinking or what specific groups of people are thinking and how they came to those conclusions and those thoughts and 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 the like, right? And obviously, like when I first got on social media, a lot of it, like Clubhouse, different apps, was really like talking to the Black Hebrew Israelites. I don't know if they like that term, Black Hebrew Israelites, but the Hebrew Israelites on the app, and it was like at the time it was like they're wilding out, and it was like you're on the Kanye Curry, it was just like that type of thing. And so I got involved, wanting to defend Judaism, right? Like you come in, and you want to defend and say, oh, that's wrong, whatever. And then I became more intrigued about the thinking process, right? Because a lot of times when you talk to a lot of the Hebrew Israelite camps, right? And then obviously there's a big distinction between the Hebrew Israelite camps versus the Hebrew Israelite Board of Rabbis, with Rabbi Fournier that goes all the way back to Rabbi Matthews over 100 years ago, right? So those are two completely different worlds. So I'm talking about strictly about the people who are on, they proselytize, right? Everything is a very harsh language against Judaism and these types of things. And so it was kind of like an intro in a lot of ways of looking into my own culture. You know what I'm saying? Because the Hebrew Israelite guys are generally around my age, and younger. Like 10 years younger type of thing. My age and older, right? But it's like, what is the basis of that though? Like, why? Like, what is the basis around that concept? Like the concept of African American, and it's like even the design of the African American. It's like sometimes some people say that one of the reasons why the Shiach had to come through, Ruth coming through Moab is because there were qualities that were inside of the nation of Moab that were needed in order to create a king. Even though Shaul was the 13 years of Benjamite, after that it was, you know, the Judah boys, took over, right? And and they talk about a lot of those qualities that weren't not necessarily innate to the Jewish people. This is just a perspective, right? I'm not saying this is a conclusion, but those qualities were important to build a certain aspect within Klal Israel, that the natural element of being in the tent coming, from Yaakov, there were things. And even, you think about the mixed multitudes joining in. So there's something to be said about the picking up of sparks, the picking up of very energies, various talents, very, I don't know if you could say koakim, different strengths or whatnot, and to build something unique and different, right? And so when you look at the African American, it's a very interesting thing because, you know, first of all, it's a big story, right? Like it's not like just a clear cut story. It's not like, the transatlantic slave trade and this, all these different things. But we can say that the African American definitely comes from a spiritual root on the west of Africa. If you want to say it's Israelite, if you want to say it's other African religions, whatever, they came from a very spiritual root. But then they came to America and they intermixed with all these different people. Some of it was forced through rape. Other was just you know, social construct. Just social dynamics, living amongst other people. And you think about, like, you hear a lot of black people say they have American Indian in them. A lot of black people, say, oh well, I have Irish in me, or I have, British in me, or you have people say like, I got, Spanish in me, Hispanic, this, all these different things. And you think about like that element, the African American of having like so many different dynamics of people making up who they are, right? Because we can't say they're exclusively African anymore, even though that's the brand, right? So many mixtures, right? So that's one element, right? There's one element, which is because we're trying to understand the African American, right? We're trying to understand like what is this dynamic that God created, right? Because like when we want to just say like, oh, well, it's an extension of Klal Israel, whatever, it's just like you got limiting it to a degree. You know what I'm saying? Like there's 70 faces of the Torah, right? But it's like is that limiting it? Because it's like, what is that, right? What is that component, right? And then you think another component, another aspect you have to throw into it, which is the intelligence that comes out of trauma, right? The intelligence that comes out of trauma. Like if you notice, like people who grow up in very traumatic environments, no matter what their background is, they when they get older, they have certain sensitivities that become like you see these people, they call themselves empaths, right? Empaths, like people who are very sensitive, they could feel energies, they could feel vibrations, all these type of they're very highly sensitive. But what they show is a lot of these people, they grew up in environments where they had very unstable parents. And because they had unstable parents, when they came into environments, they had to, kind of like tippy toe into the room and see what the temperature was. And then from there, they knew how to react. So that developed a form of intelligence, right? Or, you're funny. You hear about Justin Bieber, right? And when Justin Bieber, was big famous musician, but his mom in the interview said, when Justin was a kid, me and his father got divorced, and I was going through, and I had a lot of depression. And when Justin was a kid, he would sing for his mother and perform for his mother, and it made her happy. So a lot of his creative gift in terms of that ability to transfer energy and to connect came out of wanting to save his mother, right? Or like, like another good example is like, like Drake, right? Drake, is my favorite, well, it's for sure my favorite rapper. But the thing that's interesting about Drake is like, he writes songs that girls and guys can sing to. You know what I'm saying? Like a girl could sing a Drake song with the same strength as a guy. And you can't say that about a lot of other rap songs. You know, a guy can't sing Cardi B, you know, with the same intensity as a girl, you know, or a girl can't really sing, you know, I can't even think of anybody, you know, Little Yachty. Well, maybe Little Yachty's kind of like in the same vein, almost like Drake in a little bit. But I was gonna say NBA YoungBoy, right? So I'm saying like the guys who sing NBA YoungBoy mean something differently, you know, than it does for a girl. But Drake, you know, him, you know, Little Yachty, there's people like this that you can sing. Anyways, I don't want to go so into that, but the point is saying Drake's mother was also interviewed once, and she was saying Drake grew up around a lot of women, right? His parents were separate, you know, this. So he grew up with, you know, aunts and cousins, and this was always a lot of women around, right? And she's always a lot of women in the house, these types of things. And so Drake really understood Aubrey, right? Learned how to talk to women and to communicate, you know, and I was able to take that talent and then be able to use that in this frame of music. So I'm just using people, there's different experiences in life that bring out certain talents, you know, and a lot of those experiences generally come through traumatic experience or highly stressful experiences, right? Or whatever. So when we talk about the African American experience, you also have to look at it from that frame. That think about what it is to grow up in a social culture that everywhere you walk is is understood by the society around you as not as a human movement, but as a product movement. And so because you are in the frame of product, you have a certain set of laws and regulations that you exist underneath. And so over time, that definition of being a product has evolved, you know, to being, you know, a human being, right? So it's only up until recently, you know, the America is accepted the African American as a full-fledged equal human being. And even that, you know, there's still even arguments there. Like, are the laws in America really equal, you know, in many ways? And people argue no. But nevertheless, the point is still saying that this is the social environment that these people have grown up in. This is a traumatic environment that these people have grown up in, where they've had to, you know, in order to maintain, they had to, you know, work twice as hard as other people, right? Their behavior had to be twice as better than anyone else. If they made the same mistakes as other people, they get twice the punishment as anyone else, right? We see that in drug laws, drug convictions, all these things, right? So, like, why does that reality exist in that way? And then the question is, what comes out of that? Right? You're under such stress, right? What a diamond is built through pressure, right? So, from that standpoint of a diamond being built through pressure, from a diamond being built with pressure, then what is this pressure in this environment done to the African American from an intellectual, from a psychological, from an emotional intelligence, and what detriments and what gifts came out of such a situation, right? Like, what came out of that, right? What came out of a human being being put into this particular traumatic situation? When we walk down the street and there's a white woman walking down the same street, we get an anxiety because we could be criminalized for just being in that environment. Not saying we did something, just being in an environment is a form of criminalization that's happened and is part of the social design of America, right? If I'm in non-Black spaces, I have to act in a certain way, or that non-Black space will define me as property versus a human. I could go from the president to being a nigga in just one action, one outburst, right? We saw that with Obama. It's one action. Like Kanye said at work, Obama's biggest accomplishment was being perfect for 4 years or 8 years. He didn't really make any changes. He did it, but he just didn't mess up. And that's been our relationship in America, that we have not been allowed to just be regular humans and relax. There's been no manuka. It's no rest. So we have to really look at the design of that African American and really think about like, okay, well, like this design of this people and the conditions and the dynamics. I mean, we could see a lot of things come out of it. Now we start thinking about Black intelligence. What does that actually really mean? Not, oh, because you're dark skinned and you're better than other people. No, I'm not. I'm talking about Black intelligence as it relates even to the African, right? I mean, the people in North America, right? Number one, you're growing up in a first world country, right? The most powerful idea maybe in human history. That's number one. So that in itself is a whole, regardless if you're black, white, Hispanic, whatever your background is, you wake up every day and you are an American, and it's the most powerful idea on planet Earth. We don't even realize that. It took me to come overseas and live overseas in different places to realize that people are really looking at us like you guys are them. You guys are them, right? And so that's a thing in itself. So past that level of privilege, past those level of challenges, when you see the African American struggle, it's not the black struggle around the world. The black struggle around the world is strictly for survival. Ours is equality and with the most powerful entity in the world. It's two different struggles. It's two different dynamics. It's two different levels of intellect. The intellect we have that we have to deal with in the West is not what they're dealing with within Rwanda or in the Congo. Now they have some deep parts, they have cultural histories, they have all these different things. And those things are great, but we're going to get there. But the point is saying at the end of the day, we're not talking about skin tone. We're talking about human beings in a certain social construct, and that certain social construct propelling him or her to connect in certain ways. Right? Like I know girls who've had really traumatic experiences growing up. They have a problem in relationships because they're so calculated, because they're so on the edge about trauma that could or may happen, or that pain that they experience coming back, that they have like their plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, already lined up. And 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 because of that, they never build anything. Because once they feel that there could be some trauma experience, they run to plan B. So as they see a trauma experience, they run back to plan A. So as they have a trauma experience, they do C, right? And so they never really go anywhere. But the point is the same, they're still very sophisticated people who are able to calculate and think things out in long term. Now, in another setting, that same ability could be extremely profitable, especially like something like in business, right? Or being a writer or any types of things where you have to think things out, being a chess player, whatever. But the point is just saying these are the things that come out of it. So now we have to look at a group of people who have all these different DNA components, right? They got DNA components from Europe, DNA components from Africa, DNA components from various aspects of Africa, DNA components from American Indians, DNA components from Spanish, right? Even the people in Jamaica, they got that super DNA stuff going. We see it on the track team. But the point is just saying that. So when we see that, we're just talking about a lot of people in a certain social condition and in the response to that social conditions. Right now, we're not talking about Judaism. We're not talking about being descendants of Israelites. We're not saying anything. We're talking about the basis of human beings coming to this land, right, as slaves, right, completely broken, humbled, beaten, and then put into a social construct where they're bred, and then over time they intermix and they evolve into this thing. So when Africans tell us like, oh, well, you guys are Africans, you're from Africa, and it's like, yeah, but no, because we are, it's like they want to take that African component of our existence and make that the main thing, because it's not about Africa, because they don't talk about the connection to Africa. They talk about in the frame of slavery. So they want to say you're black. They want to say you're African American, but it's just like, is that really my DNA? Like, is that really my DNA? Like, maybe when they first came off of the plantation, the slave ship, you could say, like, oh, okay, well, they came off the plantation, they came from Africa, and they said, okay, fine. But 500 years later, in allegedly the most free society ever created in human history, even though, it was illegal for black and white people to get married, but still, nevertheless, the point is just saying black people still intermix with other people. And so, like, over a course of hundreds of years and generations, like, what makes them per se black or African, like, what I'm saying? Like if you put me and Rabbi Pinchas next to each other, Chief Rabbi Pinchas, we don't look the same. You know what I'm saying? Like our facial designs, we don't look the same, right? But if you put me and Rabbi Kish next to each other, you will see similarities, right? So it's just saying that what is the African American? Is that term misleading? What is the byproduct of the social conditions that these particular people have been through? What are the talents that evolved out of this trauma? What are the detriments that came out of this trauma? That's part A, right? All that is just part A. Just the same way Ramchal is taking us through the Insof and to this part. This is the same part. This is the thing. We have to be clear on what the African American is, right? Because if we look at it as people who came to the transatlantic slave trade and they came to the United States and then, went through the slavery, then that's not honest. Because that African descent thing, when does that change? When that white man had raped that black woman and they had children, what are they at that point? Are they white? Or are they black? Or are they biracial? Because in America, they just said black. Why do they say black? Because they had a rule of one drop rule. If you had one drop, you were considered property. Don't say black, don't say slave, property. You were a product, right? You were a product, right? And so if you had any of this other DNA that was not European, I guess, I mean, and even that obviously we know evolved, you were considered product on this land, right? You were considered product on this land. So now we're dealing with this issue of now we're dealing with this issue of product on this land, right? And property on this land, right? And so now that became the definition that they used for people with being black, right? That became the definition, right? You're a product, you're property, right? And that was the code word for slave, it's a code word for black, right? You are property, right? And so the way that America was designed, based off of if you had any aspect of what they would say black, and black it could be even that time, even Jewish, even Hispanic, Native American, any of these things, right? Any of those things would consider you part of the other, right? And if you had that, I guess the African thing, anyways, it's a whole thing, right? And I'm not a sociologist. I'm not going to take you through the steps of how it evolved, date by date. But the point is, nevertheless, this is a relationship, right? And so when we talk about this idea of creating solutions in our communities, we have to understand like this core composite of like the basis of the identity itself is confusion. Because to say that these people are black in 2025 is like, what are you talking about? They're mixed with Hispanics, they're mixed with white people from Europe, they're mixed with American Indians and all these different things. So are you saying that they're still property? Or are you saying that they're black? Because you can't say that they're black. Because genetically, that does not exist anymore. You know what I'm saying? If I'm from Africa, I shouldn't have hair chests. You know what I'm saying? So it's just saying that like that's the European inside of me. That's the reason why I have body hair. You know what I'm saying? And then Sorry about that. What did I leave off at?
Yeah, Rob, you back?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What part did I leave off at?
Uh, where were you at? You were going to what makes like a black person African American, or what makes them black. You were going to like one drop of blood, brings you into that category, and then you was kind of explaining what is black, like what is it? How can you say this is exactly what it is at this point? Like we've evolved from being African American, we've evolved from being black per se. It's like they're intermixed. You're right there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So on that point, it's saying exactly that. It's saying like so like when I'm trying to come to some type of approximation about um, you know where I'm going, I have to have a basis of who I am, right? And the way that we've been dealt with in Western society is that we've always had to attach ourselves to these general themes, which are all true, but they're not exclusive. So there was a time when African Americans like, oh, well, we're American Indian. Yeah, it's true. Some people say that, oh, well, we mix with Hispanics. It's true. Some people say we byproducts of rape on plantation. It's true, right? And so that component of that component of that component of understanding that all these things are true but not exclusive, then you have to say it's a different thing. Now, what we're talking about, the issue is like now the era of robot technology, right? That's where we step up. So the dynamic of robot technology, AI technology, global outsourcing, right? All of these mechanisms have created, like if you look at modern history, and not even say modern history, I'm talking about you could go all the way back to the times of Noah. Society was based around the labor of human beings, right? And so the labor of human beings, the labor of human beings is the labor of human beings is the basis of the labor of human beings is the basis of how society has been built. And so now we're in an era we have robots that can do these things. You have other forms of technology that could do these things. And so from that from that perspective, right? From that perspective, um, you know, from that perspective, we're talking about a new overhaul in all society, right? We're saying like everything in society is going to change as we know it. The way that buildings are designed, the way that roads are made, the way that food is processed, the way that information is delivered, the way education is expressed, right? What is education? All these things change. Now, the thing is, in order to, like, for example, why was America able to grow ahead of the rest of the world, right? The Industrial Revolution, right? The Industrial Revolution was a time where America took in new technologies, new ideas, new ways of infrastructure development faster than the other countries around the world. A couple with the fact that before that they had slave labor, right? So between the free labor of slavery gave them great margins on agriculture, and then even that evolved into machinery, right? Right. Places in China still have people farming. You know what I mean? Like with their hands in the field, right? As were America with the cotton gins and all these different types of things. So the point is saying that what made America ability to do that? Because of how the country was designed, right? Because of how the infrastructure of the country was designed, right? It determined how uh, it determined how their ability to move with the opportunities of change, right? The opportunities have changed. They were able to move because of the infrastructure. Now, what I'm proposing is saying that with the African American, something else exists in a similar way. Once we accept the concept of who we are, which is a composite, which is an accumulation, which is a collage, which is an amalgamation of many of the cultures that were indigenous here to the West, along with influences from the East, right? Because we have Africa, many of us have Israel, we have all the places in between, the migrations from Yemen, from the Arab Peninsula into the east of Africa. So we have all these different aspects of who we are that make us who we are, right? And that's a different design. That's a different human design, right? Because most people say, "Hey, I'm from Europe, I'm from Africa, I'm from Spain, I'm from whatever they're from. They're from these places, and they can say, "Hey, my family lived here for 400 years, and then we immigrated here." Or my family, African Americans, we can't say that unless we identify ourselves in the perspective of property, right? And if we accept ourselves as property, then our only identity is based off of that aspect of our DNA that's connected to the slave trade, right? But when you remove that concept and say, like, no, I'm actually connected to many different components. I'm connected to American Indians. I'm connected to Hispanic people. I'm connected to Europeans. I'm connected to other voices of Africans and my whole Aboriginal history that came from the East that existed forever. And now I'm here in North America, the most powerful country in the world, dealing with unbelievable, stressful, difficult situations, right? And this is who I am today. Now, moving in that trajectory, it seems like a lot of the social changes that are going to happen because of technology, it seems like many of the traditional cultural structures and frames and bondages and these types of things, they're going to be broken, right? They're not gonna exist, right? Because they only work because of a certain structure, right? You have a corporation, it's a top-down structure. You have employees. The employees have to go to university, right? In order to go to university, you have to go to K through 12, right? And you have to make money, right? Because you got to buy a house, you got to get a car, you have kids, you got to pay for food, clothes, bigger house. And so this is the system. But if that doesn't exist anymore, and the person doesn't have to go to work in the morning, and that corporation doesn't exist in that same way anymore, and it's not that you could just go to a college and you could get a job and everything. When that system is gone, how do you evolve into a new reality? How do you accept new social conditions? When you think about like in the civil rights movement, where you had they had like the integration in the schools, right? So like the white schools, the ones that the black kids to kind of like integrate into the school, and like the people opposing that was just the worst, right? They were cussing the little kids out. They're coming to school, calling them all types of names. We don't want to be integrated. We don't want, we don't want these people in the same kids as our schools, our kids, and so thing. We don't want this. Now, a lot of people look at those people in the South and they criticize them and say, like, God, look how disgusting that is. But they don't want to accept the fact that for hundreds of years prior to that, those same people were indoctrinated by the U.S. government to look down on Black people and to see them as not human beings and all these things. They were told that by the education system. They were told that. So now they change it, and then we're looking at them like, why are you reacting that way? They're reacting that way because that's what they were told. They were told to hate Black people. They were told to hate Hispanic people. They were told to hate Jews, right? Those people are not like us. So when integration came in, they resisted it. because of the social construct that they were developed in. And so what I'm saying is that when we look at society in general, there's a lot of social constructs that are not necessarily that extreme, right? But it's still, we have social constructs that exist that don't allow us to go past certain points as human beings, right? And now, because of the reconfiguration of society, we're going to be forced to. So my question and my point is saying that, who is more likely to be able to lead that charge of a new society with new rules, right? With new structures than people who've been through a tremendous amount of trauma and also are not limited to any particular set of definitions about self, right? And so the idea of getting to this place of self-definitions is accepting a new identity, which is not on a frame of property, but on the frame of a unique people, a unique person that is a compilation of many different influences, right? And like people like me and yourself, we choose to follow the Torah. We choose to keep the mitzvot. Probably has to do with what strand of that mixture we come from, right? But nevertheless, this is the challenge, right? Because without this reconfiguration, we can't connect to God fully, right? You have to connect to Hashem as you are, not who you want to be, not this other thing. And why do you have to be anything other than you are, right? And the challenge is just finding out who you really are, not what you want to be, not what you need to be, but who you are. And the more we dig into that idea of who we are, right, we'll be able to like have a relationship with Hashem, right? Because we're talking to Hashem and we're not even really speaking in our own voice. We're speaking in all these other, we're still like, they say like on Pesach, a person should be like, ready for the Exodus. They should be restless, type of a thing. And so um, you should be restless, right? And so we still have this restlessness. It's like, oh, I'm an Israelite. Oh, I'm this, and I'm that, and I'm that. And I'm just thinking about like, what does that mean? Okay, I have a DNA inside of me, yeah, for sure. But I'm so many things, right? I'm so many mixtures of God and God's people. And to not really fully be embracing that and not connecting to that is like, I don't get that. And even to say like, oh, I'm an American or whatever, right? But my DNA goes back way before America, right? And so now you have to ask yourself, like, is these nationalistic ideas, are they taking me away from my humanity? Because when we look at all of our historical history, I bet we could find so much inside of all of us that's exactly the same, you know. And so, so anyway, so that's just a point, just to go into that idea because I think this is a part of healing, right? Healing is being able to understand, accepting who you are, right? And part of accepting who you are is understanding that there has to be a klipa involved in that process. Well, part of the acceptance of yourself is like there's an aspect of shame, there's an aspect of embarrassment, whatever it is, right? And so those aspects of shame and embarrassment that we have is part of that process of seeing the light, of seeing the beauty, that we have, inside of us, right? But it comes through that acceptance. It comes through that, that ability to look at my history and see that, oh, this happened to my ancestors, and that happened to my ancestors, and this happened to my ancestors, and this happened. And all these things made up who I am, right? And some of those things are beautiful. Some of those things came in tragedy. Some of those things came in, confusion, right? But nevertheless, this is who I am. And from accepting that, I can connect with those powers that are inside, because all these nations have powers. The Spanish aspect in our DNA, or Hispanic, whatever you want to call it, they have powers. They built those temples, the Mayans, the American Indians. We know that they were influencing, the cosmos and all these different things, right? The Europeans, And we have to find the Torah first, obviously. But either way, this is who I am. And moving forward in that, no one can control me. No one can control my definition of what that is. If I say I'm black, then that's a definition. If I say I'm white, that's a definition. If I say I'm Hispanic, that's a definition, right? But if I focus on the idea of who am I as it relates to God, that's not, no one can limit that, right? That's why when I say I'm a Jew, right? That's my definition with God. Now, people may want to institutionalize it and make it into a human construct, but that is my relationship with God. You know what I'm saying? And that's why I'm a Jew, not because of a social contract. It's because my soul was chosen to be a part of the force of bringing God's light into his reality. Right? All right. So let's go into a little bit. I know it's like a big talk, but these are the things that make us powerful. Right? When we move past the level of self-definition given to us by our society, and we decide the definitions, and we decide our outlook, and we decide these different things, when we do that, that's when we are unstoppable, right? Because we are limitless. We're part of the Ein Sof, right? We are God's creation. We're not a byproduct of Western society. We're not a byproduct of the narrative of Western society. In fact, we really don't have anything to do with it, right? Because it's an idea. It doesn't have anything to do with God. It's an idea that, a group of guys came up with, and it made sense and it allowed people to be functional, but like in itself, it's just not what it is, right? So anyway, so I these are the things that I think help all of us become free, right? Because being a Jew, I have to accept that this is the name that God gave me, right? It's not like I'm a Phoenician or I'm a Kanani or you know what I'm saying? No, this is God chose me to have this identity, right? Whether you come through returning back to Judaism or your parents were already into it. But nevertheless, your soul was chosen in the heavens to come to fulfill these precepts. All right, so let's go into Ramchal a little bit. We'll get a little bit done. We have to have these talks, bro, because we're not just learning. We're not robots here. You know what I mean? Like people just want to learn and this type of thing. So no, learning has to have meaning, right? Because like when we're learning, the Sefer, and we're learning from the Ramchal, it's like, well, am I changing as a person as I'm learning this, right? Am I deconstructing that? Hey, I am a byproduct of the endless world. I came into this world to remove the blood of shame that my soul had in the upper heavens, and so I came down to this world to correct things, to fix things. That's it. That's it. And that's why I'm a Jew. And I am here to help other people in the world also see this is also their purpose as well. This is why I'm a Jew, right? And anything else that comes into my reality, it's not real. So I have to get out of whatever type of thinking that wants to limit me. Okay, so it says, okay, so it says like this. Chapter 11, Kalach, Chokhmah. So he says like this, the image of prophecy derives from Malchut, and only through the lenses of Malchut can we understand what is above and what is below. I just sound very deep, and I'm not going to try to figure it out. I'm tempted to, but it's big. Okay, it says, Einayim, so is it the ability of the Sphirot to be represented in the images in the likeness of prophecy derives from the sphere of Malchut. Okay. So the ability for control to be
You're starting to break up.
images and likeness.
Hey, Rob, you're starting to break up, Rob.
In this frame of the frame likeness, comprehensive root is a form made. You know what I'm saying? So right now we know that there are different worlds, right? We said yesterday that we have the world of absolute, the world of hold on. All right, hold on. Yeah, is it better now?
And it's still a little muffled, but you're not breaking up anymore.
You can hear me better now? Is it better?
Yeah, that's better.
Oh, hold on. Not yet. Hold on. Let's try it again. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
All right, perfect. All right. So anyway, so this is like a big concept because like what he's basically doing is saying is that he's working the frame of the different worlds, and he's saying like, hey, if you went on vacation, if you went on vacation and you went into this right? You went on a vacation, but light is expressed in physical and material forms. Meaning, like, for example, like like you have a tree. Like I'm looking at a tree right now, right? Now the tree that I'm looking at is the root of this tree is what molecules and all these composites that make up this mechanism called tree, right? So I'm looking at a tree, right? I'm looking at the trunk, I'm looking at the leaves, I'm looking at the leaves that are coming alive, the leaves that are dying, the whole thing, right? But what Ramchal is saying, that's only how the tree looks in this world that I am in. If I took another flight and I went to a higher world, okay, I say, hey, you know what? I took a nice trip, I paid $2,000 and I took a trip to the world of Asia. It was nice. It was a good chill. I saw all this great stuff. But now I'm going to save up more money and I'm going to go on this other trip and it costs $10,000 and it's to the world of Yitzira. So I'm going to go to the world of Yitzira and I'm going to go up there. So he's saying the same tree exists in the world of Yitzira that exists in the world of Asia, but the difference is they look completely different. They're completely different. So that's what he's saying. He's saying that we're only of Yitzira, right? He says even the very forms of the images themselves provide knowledge of the wisdom with which the worlds that the worlds are governed. He says, for through them we can know how the Gina, God's need sake of lower realms. And from through Chut, it is possible to gain knowledge of the levels above it. He says, in these beings, these being the actual powers and attributes of God's governance. He says, i.e., the spheros themselves, as opposed to the image through which these powers and attributes appear when seen into the Malchut. What's so great about this? So I remember, so it was a really great reading. Like it was a writing by the Alter Rebbe. So the Alter Rebbe, is the Baal Tanya. He wrote the Tanya, and basically is the founder of the Chabad movement. And so he writes, he talks about the Torah, and he talks about how the Torah comes from the heavens, and it's only until it gets into this physical world that we're in right now, only through this physical world that we're in right now, that it forms into a book. Only in this physical world. But if you went to the world higher, you wouldn't see. You will see the letters, or you'll see words. You go higher, you see letters, and if you go higher than that, you see the DNA of the letters. She says, "Achar sheneve enayin ha bivinot." So he says, following our discussion of prophetic likeness and images, we will now explain the benefits they provide. Okay. It's crazy stuff. I can't believe reading this. So it says, Halachi mehe ma'ana amar hazeh. Bet. She said, the pre-proposed consists of two parts. He says, part one, the ability for the spherotes. He says, the ability of the spherotes. This explains where the image of the prophecies are rooted. Even the likeness, he says even the even the very the very image and likeness themselves. This explains the benefit we gain from them. All right, so this is the thing. I want to stop here. Can talk about a little bit about this. So we talk, because he's going to go into a very comprehensive structure. Do it like to start. We can even maybe learn this evening too, like maybe around like 12 to 20 o'clock. But that's possible. I mean, it's not 100%, but it's very possible. But I want to just respect these structures because when we go back in the classes, I don't want it to be so choppy. So this is an introduction to chapter 11 in Kalach Pitchei Chokhmah, and through through that part. Anyways, so we started. So anyways, I want to talk it out a little bit. So some of your reflections, Otino.
Baruch Hashem. It's you always hear, as above, so below. Like there's a lower Jerusalem and it's a higher Jerusalem, and everything that we do below affects above. There's a continuity, a connectivity in a sense. So it's, Ram Call is man, it's outer space, it's next level. The fact that he's not just, approaching the topic of prophecy, he's unlocking the keys. It's kind of like it's probably not the best example. I mean, it's Torah, but like Balak and Bilam. Like Balak was the external aspects of, he was a magician. Balak's Ben Zippor. He created the magic birds who foretell the future and all this, whatever. But he knew where to curse. Like, hey, God curse him over here. But he needed Bilam because Bilam had the keys. He had the words. He had the understanding of, okay, yes, you can externally be here, but being there without the keys, getting to the door means nothing if you can't open it. So you had that outer and inner aspect, and it seems like the Roman call is giving us that, cognitive ability to view, not only approach prophecy, but now we're getting inside of prophecy and what are the prophets experiencing, and not just from that aspect, but what are the Sifirot? How do they interconnect? How do they, you know, move within themselves? And it's like, wow. So it's next level, but he's giving us the ability to digest it actually, and actually be able to articulate it and see how it, plays out into the world. So yeah, I'm happy we stopped that you broke it down like that, because it's like you have to really take it in and
Yeah.
and kind of like just kind of meditate with it for a moment and see, because there's many connections, like just like I was using Balak and Bilam. I'm like, oh, okay, I hear what he's saying. You start to build out your own structure to understand it, in a sense. Like you told us before, you have to learn how to learn. So it's perfect. Hope we can get back on it
At 20.
2000.
We'll
Yeah,
shoot. We'll shoot. We'll shoot. I got like a whole all over here at night now. You know what I mean? But I do want to just touch on one because my phone's gonna die, unfortunately. But the reason why it's so important to re-identify our makeup and our design, because at the end of the day, each human being is an expression of a spirit, right? And by definition of us being an expression of a spirit, that means we're part of the divine body of Hashem, right? The Shekhinah. And so when we get into these other elements, we can't go back there, right? We have to go back there. You have to know you're a spherot. I'm a spherot. We all represent different spherot team, right? We all represent different spherot teams. So this is who we are. This is a real design of the human being. And everything else is just something we learned in North America or Western side, whatever, but it's not real. Like we are, divine entities, and we have to work from that premise if we're going to connect to things like prophecy. the Ramchal did not see himself as a race.